I've been wrong about Help Wanted 2 so much it's crazy. 8 months ago I made a video convinced that I'd finally cracked it, and 6 months ago I made a video amending that to where it's still kind of the same thing but with new players involved, including some of the ideas about the chain of mimics, and I still like those ideas and I think they're possible, but after the release of Secret of the Mimic, and in tandem, MimicCustody, I think a much simpler solution is right in front of us, and it has to do with the ongoing battle over the control of the Mimic between Fiona, or M1, and Glitchtrap, or M3. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. Now I know I just threw a lot of terminology at you, so let me break down some of that theory jargon. MimicCustody is admittedly a silly name I made up for the theory that I spent the past 2 weeks covering. The idea that the current story of Five Nights at Freddy's is Fiona and Glitchtrap fighting over the control of the Mimic endoskeleton. Fiona, or M1, wants M2 and the Mimic endoskeleton to remain intact because she wants to reset M2 so it can continue to be her son David again. Whereas Glitchtrap wants the body of the Mimic endoskeleton to enter the real world with, so he wants to wipe M2 from its system. All the while, M2 just wants to be its own thing, so it doesn't want either of them to succeed. So what does that theory have to do with Help Wanted 2? Are you melting or do you want down? I can't tell if you're like leaned so far off, buddy. Well, Help Wanted 2 is interesting in this context because it is simultaneously the most and least confusing FNAF game that we've ever gotten. On the surface, the main plot of the game isn't that difficult to get to. We're playing as Cassie's dad, trying to figure out what's going on at the Mega Pizzaplex, but in doing so, we're manipulated, tricked, used, and killed. That's all pretty easy assumptions to make based on the evidence we have in front of us. Granted, none of that's confirmed, but that's the part of Help Wanted 2 that pretty much 99% of people agree on. However, no one can seem to agree on the details, the parts in which this game get really weird. Things like, why are we collecting Voltron-style Fazbear toys? And why is it that when we do that, Glitchtrap seems to materialize in the real world? Is any of what we're seeing in this game real at all? Why is Glitchtrap handing us the things that lead to his demise? Why does Vanny kill Glitchtrap? There's never been a super clean explanation for any of this. And even though I've got an idea I'm really confident in, I admit it's not without its holes. Frankly, the last theory I had on Help Wanted, which I was still super confident in, had plenty of holes too. Previously, I thought this game was a fight between Vanny and GGY, the Glitchtrap personas within Vanessa and Gregory respectively. I thought by the time of Help Wanted 2, both of those personas were removed from Vanessa and Gregory, but still existed and were fighting over control of what happens next. I still think that theory has a lot of merit, but in a post-Secret of the Mimic world, I do still think Help Wanted 2 is showing us a battle between two forces. I just think the players have changed. But honestly, could you blame me? Until Secret of the Mimic came out, I didn't even think Fiona was going to be relevant in Five Nights at Freddy's. I mean, she's barely relevant in the story of the Mimic, so I think that's fair. I think, instead, Help Wanted 2 is showing us a possible climax to the battle between Fiona, or M1, and Glitchtrap, or M3, over the body of M2, the Mimic endoskeleton they're both trying to get their hands on. So who's on what side, and what ultimately happens during this game? Well, there's two endings. In one of them, Glitchtrap is seemingly crushed and destroyed forever. And in the other ending, Glitchtrap is seemingly materializing in the real world. So if Glitchtrap is behind one of the endings, I'm gonna go with the one where he lives, which frankly is the easier ending of the two to explain. Man, these slimes are not difficult yet, but I wish there was a better way to set the mood. Wait a minute. Perfect. This video is sponsored by Raycon. Based. Don't you just love when your favorite comes back better? Look, we all liked Bendy and the Ink Machine, but I think the games really took off when we got Bendy and the Dark Revival. Well, this July, guess who's back and better than ever? Raycon's fan favorite everyday earbuds classic model. Now packing active noise cancellation, which was literally the one thing they were missing before. Raycon's audio quality is always a standout feature, rivaling major audio brands that are double the price. And for someone like me who is always listening or watching to something literally all day, their 32-hour battery and 8 hours of playtime are an essential so I don't have my earbuds die midway through the day. But just as important as battery life is comfort. If it's in my ears all day, they need to be comfortable. And the optimized gel tips on these are perfect. Another part of wearing them all the time is the different modes that I use throughout the day. If I'm out and about, their awareness mode is perfect for being in the moment while listening to some music. But if I'm just trying to relax outside, then turning on the active noise canceling while laying next to my bird feeder is my own little mini vacation. I could be there for genuinely hours if I didn't have kids to look after. I have other branded earbuds. I have at least 3 scattered around the house somewhere, but these Raycon Everyday Earbud Classics are with me all the time. You know the classic like phone, keys, wallet, let's go? Mine is literally phone, keys, wallet, earbuds, let's go. And they travel with me from home to the store to the park even. And part of the reason why is the protection they get from the Raycon Everyday Classic protective case, which is so easy to put on, I'm literally going to do it right now. And just like that, my earbuds are even better protected and they look so sick. So if you're ready to treat yourself, go to buyraycon.com/rytoast to get 20% off fan favorite Everyday Earbud Classic, sponsored by Raycon. Perfect. Kind of just what I needed to get in the mood for doing some dungeon diving. Some killer fantasy music. And I don't need to hear their screams. That's better. Alright, let's go. The main ending of the game sees Glitchtrap exiting a charging pod to a hard cut of several staff bots trying to kill us, to another cut of the perspective of MaskBot handing the Vanny mask to Cassie. So what's going on here? Is Glitchtrap literally materializing in the real world? I don't think so. I think this is a metaphor for Glitchtrap entering the Vanny mask, likely the one we're currently wearing. Essentially, we're wearing the Vanny mask, Glitchtrap enters it and then has us killed, so then we can take this mask and give it to someone to infect. But if that's the case, how did this come about? How did he manage to enter that mask? Well, that comes down to how we access this ending, which is just playing the game normally. We listen to the projector helpy and we do the task presented in front of us, and occasionally we're presented a present, each one being a different Phas Force figure, those Voltron-like action figures I mentioned at the beginning of the video. When we collect all 6, the main 4 Freddy's gang, Golden Freddy / Fredbear, and the puppet, we get one more present, the combined figure, because all of them can combine into this creature, which, yes, I think deserves to be talked about why it looks so similar to that costume the Mimic put on, but I don't have time to get into that today. But once we do that, we hard cut to the ending, the thing I just mentioned. Glitchtrap appears, we get killed, we see Cassie being handed the mask. This all seems fairly self-explanatory even without Secret of the Mimic. I don't think I'm breaking any ground here with this analysis. This version of Helpy is likely Glitchtrap, and it's stringing us along saying, if you listen to us, you'll be able to fix everything, but in listening to it, we're putting him back together. Just like in Help Wanted 1, Glitchtrap apparently needs to be gathered before he can materialize. And that's what we're doing here. We're putting him back together so he can materialize into the mask. Even with Secret of the Mimic in mind, Glitchtrap being a variant of the Mimic doesn't really change any of this analysis. He still needs a body to get to the desired Mimic endoskeleton. So if this is all mostly the same with or without Secret of the Mimic, why am I making this video? Well, that comes down to the second ending, the weird one. In the other ending, we listen to a different voice, collect poppets, go to Princess Quest 4, and watch Vanny kill Glitchtrap in front of us. That's wild. This is an insane ending. However, taking it as a whole, if this ending is destroying Glitchtrap, and we know there's 2 major players going on, then it seems most likely that this ending is being controlled or manipulated by Fiona, or M1. And although on the surface that seems fairly straightforward, this is the ending that always stumps theories a little bit, and frankly it does to this theory too. While the idea of Fiona trying to destroy Glitchtrap makes sense, how does Vanny get involved in any of it? Well, at least the process of getting this ending, I think, is incredibly clear in a post-Secret of the Mimic world. The key to understanding this is how you access the secret ending in Help Wanted 2. The fact that you have to follow the vague hints to do secrets in the minigames. The interesting part of that being how those hints are delivered to the player. The first time you play a minigame that has a secret in it, Mystic Hippo tells you that you've received a message. The message being graffiti near one of the spots in the pizzeria. Mystic Hippo is a strange character, one that we meet for the first time in this game, and she is an absolute diva. But all of the secret advice comes from her. So throughout the game, a stationary voice is giving advice to us on how to access one of the endings. endings. How interesting is it then that the very next game has M1 pretending to be Dispatch, a stationary voice giving us directions on how to access an ending. Now, just that connection would be too loose for a theory, but it doesn't stop there. Consider the Help Wanted 2 pizzeria. Everything inside of it is Fazbear merchandise. Frankly, most of it is stuff we've seen before, but now in 3D. We get these posters of things we've seen before, toys we've seen before. I mean, they even have both of the drink clowns. But then we have Mystic Hippo, something we've never seen before that frankly might not even be a Fazbear character. She's a lot closer to Mr. Hippo from the Mediocre Melodies, which aren't Fazbear characters. And maybe she was a part of Fall Fest, after all she's next to the carousel and she fits the theming, but even still, to us, she's a brand new character. But not only is she this older new character we hadn't heard of, Secret of the Mimic tells us that Mystic Hippo is a Murray's Costume Manor original. We have this poster in the back of the Big Top showroom, one of Mystic Hippo, an area that's lacking any Fazbear branding. This is showing us that Mystic Hippo was a Murray's Costume Manor original character, and knowing the workflow of MCM, that would have likely meant that she was designed originally by Fiona. So now looking at this Help Wanted 2 ending, we get access to it by listening to a Fiona-designed Murray's Costume Manor character who's giving us hints in a similar fashion to how M1 does in Secret of the Mimic. And if we listen to it, it destroys Glitchtrap. The idea that Fiona is speaking to the player through Mystic Hippo is so direct, it's basically not even an implication anymore. But then, if Fiona is the one giving us these instructions, why is it that Glitchtrap is the one who hands us the poppets when we complete a secret? So, admittedly, this stumped me for a while. I've heard plenty of explanations on why Glitchtrap is handing us these plushies. One of them being that it wasn't originally intended, that the original game had Vanny handing it to us and it was changed. But if it was changed, then it was changed and we need to address that. Now, there hasn't been any new evidence or new discoveries that prove what I'm about to say is true, but I have settled on, I think, pretty sound logic in my interpretation of Help Wanted 2. We know that collecting these poppets, whatever they really are, allow us to destroy Glitchtrap, and we know that they exist in this space. So whatever they are, Glitchtrap would likely know about them too. And if he did, I think it would make a lot of sense if he's the one who hid them in the first place. This kind of goes into what I think Help Wanted 2 actually is in the timeline. Are we literally doing all of these tasks, or are we simply going through a computer and reviewing security logs? Well, personally, I think it's a bit of a blend of both, but the gameplay itself of Help Wanted 2, I think is much more literal than I've been giving it credit for. In Help Wanted 2, we are standing in front of a console wearing a Vanny AR mask, and we're accessing files on that console. Is it not possible that that's literally all we're doing? We're standing at this console, we activate a file, and our AR mask changes the world around us so we can interact within that file. Essentially going through the cyberspace of the Pizzaplex to rout out whatever virus is ruining it. All of these minigames could be exactly that, representations of files we're going through in this Pizzaplex. And if that's true, the poppets have a very clear explanation to what they are now. Glitchtrap took his vulnerabilities, these poppets, regardless of whatever they literally are, they represent his vulnerabilities, and he took them and hid them as deep in the coding of the Pizzaplex as possible, in obscure locations that only he would know how to figure out. So when we access these poppets, we're accessing something that Glitchtrap purposely hid. It's his program. So when we retrieve it, the hand that gives it to us is Glitchtrap. Am I saying that Glitchtrap himself is handing these to us? No. But I think the program he created is him holding on to them. So whether literally or metaphorically or visually analog-wise, we are seeing Glitchtrap's hand holding the plushie, because he's the one holding it there in the first place. Is there any direct evidence to tell us this is the case? Of course not. Welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's. But I do think logically this makes a lot of sense. So if that's the case, how does Vanny get into all of this? This is admittedly the weaker part of the theory I talked about earlier. Vanny being here is so strange, and we still have absolutely no evidence as to why she's involved in killing Glitchtrap if she's supposed to be the reluctant follower. Now, there is the whole concept that is introduced in The Flesh, where iterations of a program would kill older versions of them. But like, if that was something Vanny always wanted to do, why didn't she do it until now? That's the weird bit. So, like always, when we have no evidence here, we have to do some assuming. And I would hate to make an ass out of you and Ming, but we kind of have to here. The timeline placement of Help Wanted 2 is a little tricky considering all the different spots of the timeline we see within the minigames, but taking our previous interpretation of Help Wanted 2, again, the idea that we're just going through this monitor, then it seems fairly obvious that this game takes place after Security Breach, but before Ruin. And I still think Ruin is telling us that the canon ending of Security Breach is the Princess Quest Good Vanny ending. After all, in that ending, Freddy is beaten to a pulp and his head is removed because it's still functional, the Princess Quest arcade machine is beaten, and Freddy's head, Gregory, and Vanessa all leave the Pizzaplex safely. And then we get to Ruin, where Freddy's body is beaten and headless in the same spot it was left, the Princess Quest arcade machine is toppled over with a digital sword in it, showing that it's been beaten, and Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head are nowhere to be found within the Pizzaplex. This seems very clear to me, but it also seems that Gregory and Vanessa have been busy at work, still trying to take down Glitchtrap and save everybody. If the walkie-talkie conversation we get near the end of Ruin is actually Gregory talking to us, then that would mean that Gregory knows what's going on and knows the cave layout, likely because him, Vanessa, and Freddy's head are still actively trying to stop Glitchtrap from taking over the Pizzaplex and killing a bunch of kids. All this to say, I think that after Security Breach, it's likely that Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head escape the Pizzaplex, but are still working to stop Glitchtrap. It's in character for what we hear them say in-game, and it makes a lot of sense if they're still working toward that goal by Ruin. So during Help Wanted 2, they would likely be working towards that goal. So if Fiona was able to get into contact with Vanessa, then the Help Wanted 2 secret ending makes a lot more sense. But in order for that to make sense, we need to make two very big assumptions, which is the weaker part of this theory. I think that William Afton ran a lot of tests on M1 and M2 throughout the years, after obtaining them through buying Murray's Costume Manor. And to do that, he moved them to the sister location bunker to better control their variables. Let's look at the underground layout of MCM. We have research and development directly connected via tunnel to the underground labs beneath the Murray's mansion. Knowing that Afton takes over all of this post-Edwin, I think it's incredibly likely that Afton renovated these spaces to become the FNAF 4 house overtop the sister location bunker connected to the R&D facility, which later down the line becomes the pizzeria simulator. I think it becomes FNAF 4 in between that, but we won't get into that right now. But regardless, it doesn't take a huge leap to assume that all of this is connected. So the big assumption isn't that Afton renovated these spaces. The first assumption is that William Afton moved the F10N4 device into the sister location bunker. Physically, he could have, but it's still an assumption we have no evidence for. But if he did that, that sets up the second half of this theory. The other big assumption you have to make, that after the events of Security Breach, Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head, in trying to stop Glitchtrap for good, found the old FNAF 4 house and went down into the sister location bunker. On the surface, this is an insane idea, but luckily with some evidence that have come out, this isn't as big of an assumption to make anymore. This photo can be found around the secret ending of Secret of the Mimic, the one where you revert M2 back into David, and it's a photo of the Mimic and David sitting on a hill looking at the factory. Now, many people have made this connection, and in fact, on stream, T-Dreads pointed this out to me, that this photo we can find the location of. Looking at the Murray's Costume Manor from the parking lot, you can see that there's a tree next to it. But if you go out of bounds and put the camera behind the tree facing the factory, it's the exact same angle. This tree on a hill is where the Mimic and David were sitting looking at the factory. Now here's where it gets funky. If we take the Brazil ending, or frankly any of the Security Breach endings featuring this tree, and line up these photos and locations, this spot that many Security Breach endings feature is the same tree on the same hill, including the Good Vanny ending, where Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head are resting after escaping the Pizzaplex and being free of Glitchtrap's control. This piece of evidence has been used in a lot of different ways. I know it's one of the key parts of God David, but in this theory, this photograph is showing us that if the Good Vanny ending is canon, then when they escape, the first place they go to relax is sitting directly next to the old FNAF 4 house. This house and tree that was Murray's Costume Manor but was converted into the FNAF 4 house is right next to the Pizzaplex, and that's where they're sitting in the epilogue of the game. So the idea that in trying to stop Glitchtrap, I don't know if you can hear that, but that's crazy. So the idea that after they escape, in trying to beat Glitchtrap, they go into this abandoned building and find out it's connected to the Pizzaplex isn't that big of a stretch. Especially if Vanessa remembers any of her time as Vanny, this likely would have come up. But that is the second big assumption we need to make here. So, if both of those admittedly large assumptions are true, then we have a group of characters trying to stop Glitchtrap who soon encounter an AI robot whose entire mission statement right now is to delete Glitchtrap so her son can be recreated. So the idea that Vanessa would accept the help of Fiona and they would work together to thwart Glitchtrap makes a lot of sense. And if so, wouldn't the most advantageous position for Vanessa to be in would be the man on the inside, appearing to still be Vanny. Maybe Vanny was destroyed when Princess Quest 3 was beaten, but as Glitchtrap's gathering his information, he sees Vanny re-enter the program, almost like she was not deleted. But in actuality, it's Vanessa pretending to still be the loyal follower in order to wait until Glitchtrap is at his most exposed and vulnerable to pluck him out of the code and crush him. I think that makes a lot of sense. So the TLDW is that Help Wanted 2 is showing us one of the possible turning points into this ongoing feud. Fiona and Vanessa working together to pull away one of Glitchtrap's next victims, just enough to leave Glitchtrap exposed so they could destroy him, but it didn't work. I still think the canon ending to Help Wanted 2 is the main one. After all, it's the one that leads directly into Ruin. So then what is this ending telling us? Well, it might just be telling us how Glitchtrap could be defeated. So when we get to the next game featuring him, we know what to do. But let me know what you think, because this one is definitely more logic and assumption based than direct evidence. But we're not gonna have direct evidence for a lot of this until like 1 or 2 more games come out, so take it or leave it. In the meantime, if you're curious about why I think the Mimic doesn't want either side to win, I covered that in last week's video, which you can find right here. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share it with hashtag ToastArt. A huge thank you to the best channel members, the Dough Risers, and until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.